Thank you, Jim. First, Sue and I would like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year, especially for our veterans, our families with men and women in uniforms, especially if they're overseas, and just a special blessing on you and all of your families. You know, this time of year, I remember an old adage that I think is especially relevant if you're a politician like I am, and that is the fact that people really don't care to know how much you know until they know how much you care. And you know, as I begin to talk about what I think are important principles, the one thing that I think is necessary as Republicans and people as Tea Party is that we have the better message. We have the better message to move our country forward and make really a country that we can have hope. But we always have to remember that it's always more than just numbers and schemes, right? It's about people. And this election, we have the better message, and we can prove it to people that we care. I'm excited about being here. In fact, when they said this was going to be the first forum, on my way to meet Tim Walz, I was happy that it was the Tea Party of Rochester that was putting it on, because in 2010, when I first embarked on winning the seat from a 3-term incumbent in 30B at that time, the first group that I went to was the Rochester Tea Party Patriots, and they were in the Blondale Hotel. I don't know how many of you were there that early, but I was there. And I can tell you that I immediately felt a kinship with everyone there. Why? Because they grasped, they understood some founding principles that made this country great. And I know Jim said them a little bit earlier, but they are fiscal responsibility, individual responsibility, limited government, following the Constitution, and just being good, proud Americans, and understanding how important it is to be an American. Some would say they wore that on their sleeve. I want to just say that they were proud to be Americans. So I took that zeal and that passion for those founding principles, and I used them when I knocked on 12,000 doors. Because when I ran, it was about jobs and the economy. And if you get those three things, it leads to just that. Putting people back to work, because we have limited government, free market principles, fiscal responsibility, and a following of the Constitution. Now, I know that, in fact, there are some that would say, you know, that the Tea Party are the folks that get it wrong. In fact, you've been called all kinds of things. What I want to tell you is that you get it right. And as a staunch Republican, I embrace those principles. Consequently, tonight, November the 19th, the special night, in 1776, on November the 19th, George Washington had read to his troops something that he had Thomas Paine pen. And if you remember the scenario of what led to that particular night, Washington had been, and his troops had been chased out of New York, serious defeats on many fronts. They'd been chased through New Jersey. They had to cross the Delaware to find rescue or a place to stay in Pennsylvania. And on that fateful night, with all that going on, in fact, there was only 2,500 troops left at that point, and half of those were ill. He needed something to rally his troops. I didn't memorize the whole thing, and I've only got a paragraph that I'd like to read for you tonight. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of a man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. Of course, we know the rest of the story, don't we? Only a week later, he crosses the Delaware, he captures the fort of Trenton, and the hope that we understand as America is born again. And we go on, and we have the kind of freedoms that we have now. Folks, this is what I feel about the Tea Party Patriots. Right? We, you, stand strong. And you're not sunshine patriots. You're there for the long haul. And I want to make sure that you understand that, and I believe that you understand it. I want to finish with this. I have a record in the state that it shows that I stood tall and made sure that I stood up for those principles. And I've taken those votes for you. I'm going to do the same thing when I get to Washington, D.C. And we'll make this country strong again. Thank you.
Thank you, I'm Jim Hagedorn. It's good to be with so many God-fearing, patriotic conservatives. Thank you for being here tonight. The reason I'm running is because the country's in trouble. The government of the United States has become so big and so powerful that the people actually have begun to fear their government. We've moved into a period of what I call soft tyranny. And when President Obama ran for office and he said he wanted to transform America, well, that's exactly what he's doing. And we're moving from the rule of law to the rule of Obama in many ways. And this needs to be stopped. Now, I'm a conservative, limited government candidate with a record at the national level of reforming government, and I believe that we need big, bold reforms in order to save our country. And what we need to do is the equivalent to what Ronald Reagan did when he took office. Try to give this country another generation or so of life and turn it over to someone else. And if we don't turn things around in the next few years, I don't know how our country survives the way the forefathers envisioned it. If Obamacare becomes ingrained into the medical care system in this country, and we don't repeal it, what's going to happen to our country? Cap and trade. What's it going to do to the cost of energy in our way of life, and to our economy and our competitiveness around the world? Dodd-Frank, which is nothing but Obamacare for banks. That's going to undermine opportunity and dry up capital. All these regulations coming out of government, the EPA and so forth, beating down business, and the debt. If there's not structural changes made there, think about all these things. We have a window of opportunity to take back power and to save our country. And I know that's why you're here, and I appreciate that. And we're going to get to it. Now, the reason I'm running for Congress is to take the power from Washington, the broad power, wrestle it away from the Washington, D.C. establishment, send it back to the states and the people. That is the only way you can do anything constructive there. You can't tweak that place. You can't, margin around the edges, try to make it work. You got to take the power back. You also have to fight the bureaucracy. Go in there and beat it back. The EPA is so out of control. I think the Congress should even take back, reclaim its regulatory authority, and show people they mean business. Now, Tim Walz, he's the key. Most liberal congressman in the history of southern Minnesota. And you go, well, this is a good time for Republicans. He's got a bad record. That's not enough. You have to have a candidate that knows how to go out and run the race. A candidate that will run an insurgent challenger race. Someone who will attack. Someone who will put pressure on Walz. Someone who will go out there and tarnish his image. Someone who will get in his face if necessary. That's me. That's the campaign we're running. Go to our Facebook page. Go to our website. Check it out. That's what we're doing. Put out a piece on Obamacare. We beat the heck out of Walz. Told everybody he voted for it. Reminded him of that. Said, he went along with Nancy Pelosi. Said, you got to vote for the bill to find out what's in the bill. That's the reason we've got this thing. And then I also talked about our free enterprise reforms. Put that in about 16, 17 newspapers across the district. Got our name out there. Let people know we were running the race. I've done that on Afghanistan just a couple of weeks ago. Said, we don't need to be in Afghanistan nation building anymore. It's time to bring the troops home. Congressman Walz, quoted in the Mankato paper, he said, well, he hasn't taken a position yet on that pact with Afghanistan. We're leading. We're taking the race to Walz. We're making him defend his record. We're making him address the issues. You wonder, though, he's been in Congress for 7 years. What's he doing? Today we started a day off. I issued a press release and we did a news conference in front of Tim Walz's Mankato office, talking about Obamacare. I had residents of the 1st District there to let people know the problems they're having with the act. Premiums going up, deductibles going up, people losing their coverage altogether, people being pushed into Medicaid, which is a big issue in other government programs. I reminded the people of the press and the others that were there, Tim Walz voted for this program. He's the one that's inflicting the pain and punishment upon the people of the 1st District. He's done this to his own constituents. And you know, when Obamacare started on October 1 and people got into the mid-short thing, and everybody's had a terrible time with it. There's pain, there's suffering. This is, everyone knows, it's commonplace, it's understood. Since that time, Tim Walz has issued 18 press releases. Not one mentioned Obamacare. Not one mentioned the struggles that the people in southern Minnesota are having. I'd say that's a congressman that's out of touch, or that's a congressman with little to no compassion for his own constituents. That's the way we're running this race. We're taking it right to Walz. It's a fearless campaign. We're not afraid of him, and this is the way you have to run the race if you're going to beat an incumbent congressman. Thank you, and I ask you for your support.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you, Patriots. And first of all, thank you for remembering the veterans and the soldiers this time of year. Both my wife, if you remember my Jennifer, wait here. Both my wife and I are veterans and have spent numerous Christmases overseas. And I can tell you that even though you're deployed, sitting on a fob somewhere up in the mountains, you know that the folks back here in the United States are behind you. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm running for Congress because of my children. I have two daughters, 14 and 9. And I'm concerned that I'm about ready to offer a country to my girls that is not better off than my parents offered me. I believe very strongly my parents are going to be okay. My wife and I are probably going to be okay. But I really fear for my children and for their children. You know, I was raised in a rural family farming area in central Iowa. And my folks raised me that a little hard work, some persistence, and a pursuit of an education, anything in this great country was possible. They never asked for, they never expected help. They didn't expect a government handout. They lived within their means, but they were also willing to help someone who did need a little bit of help. And I think those are the same values that those of us here in southern Minnesota still hold. You know, when you look at our debt, we're $17 trillion in debt. That's $54,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. We're way past passing it on to our kids. We're passing it to their kids and to their kids. And when you look at the scandals at the NSA, Benghazi, the IRS, the scandals just keep adding up, Syria, we could keep going. We find that the government has become so large that it's virtually unmanageable and much too intrusive. And very shortly, the Barack Obama administration is poised to take over 1/6 of the U.S. economy. Now, let me be clear about Obamacare. It has to be repealed. You can't trust the Democrats, and it can't be fixed, and it needs to be replaced with true private sector, free market reforms. You know, the saying that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, they've kind of changed that a little bit, haven't they? Now it's, well, you might like to keep him, but you're going to have to pay more for him. Well, now we know you like to keep him, but you're not going to be able to keep him at all because your doctor may leave the profession because of Medicare, because of Obamacare. You know, and as we struggle through the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression, Tim Walz wants you to believe that this is the new normal. That it's completely normal to have 22 million people unemployed or underemployed. That it's completely normal to have 29 million people working part-time. And part of that is because of Obamacare. You see that 29-hour mandate. All across southern Minnesota and even the country, we're seeing more and more businesses either laying folks off to get under that 50-person mandate, or anybody that they do hire or plan to hire is being hired in a part-time status. That's not the American dream. That's not the America my parents offered me. And that's not the America that I want to offer my children. Folks, as I wind down my 27 years in the military and with multiple combat deployments, I look forward to serving the constituents of the 1st District with the same loyalty and fidelity that I serve my fellow soldiers. Tim Walz likes to paint himself as a moderate from Mankato when he's here. But the reality is he's one of the most liberal congressmen we have in Washington. You know, I have a theory that the longer a Democrat is in Washington, D.C., the more liberal they become. Well, it works the same way for Republicans, because the longer we see Republicans in Washington, D.C., kind of the more moderate they become. We've seen that with the budget deal. We've seen that with some of the deals that our Speaker has made with the President. But as long as we have a Congress that is willing to pass a law for us, Obamacare, and then exempt themselves and the employees of the White House from having to pay the high fees of Obamacare, we're never going to get real reform. And real reform is what we need. I'm a private sector guy. I've worked in the private sector my whole career. I've never worked for the government or in government. And I'll tell you what, I think that it's time to put private sector folks with free market thoughts back into Washington, D.C., because it's very clear that the folks that are working in and around Washington, D.C. have forgot what the private sector and the free markets can do for this country. Again, I'm Aaron Miller, and I look forward to all the questions and the interactions tonight. Thank you.
Okay, we just started with a, how's the sound on this one? Is this okay?
Use the mics.
Okay? Is this better?
No.
Yeah.
Keep-
But if I use the other one, then I'm having to hand it off to the guy. So.
But keep the
this,
mics up.
This venue only has the one mic and
Keep
one
the
down.
mics up.
So we'll just make
Tell
do
them
with
that.
this. I'm not gonna talk very much.
Keep the mics up.
This first round of questions are gonna be largely issues oriented, except for the first question. And we'll have Jim start, followed by Aaron, and then Mike. And the question is, why are you the best candidate to beat Tim Walz? 1 minute.
Well, and then I don't know about, I'll tell you, 2 reasons. One, I have a record of national legislative achievement where I actually cut the bureaucracy, saved taxpayer dollars, eliminated bureaucratic jobs, so I have a record that I can go against Walz. His is liberal. He's expanded government. He's increased the debt. He's been for big government across the board. I'm on the opposite side, so it's a pretty, very, very good, clear contrast. And once elected, I can walk right into the job and handle it. And I don't say that, you know, being cocky or anything. It's just been around that stuff for a long time. Tonight, these guys will probably hammer me once or twice for having spent too much time out there. But I think if more people had my record in Washington, that'd be a good thing, and I'd be able to be a good congressman. If they happen to win, either of them, they'd be good congresspeople too, and do a heck of a lot better job than Tim Walz. Be people we'd be proud of. I just think the way that we're running the race, demonstrating command of the issues, the way that we're taking the race to Walz, it shows that in the general election, I'm the one that can defeat him. Thank you.
Aaron.
Oh, come on, Jim, we're not going to give you a bad time about spending time in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that Jim did hit the nail on the head a little bit. We have 3 candidates in this race, and for the first time in several years, we have 3 candidates that can defeat Tim Walz. And I believe that either one of the 3 of us, if we're the endorsed candidate, we will beat Tim Walz next November. I firmly believe that in November, this seat comes back to a Republican where it belongs. But I think that I have a little bit of a leg up on the other 2 candidates for a couple of reasons. Number one, while I don't think that you need to be a veteran to run for Congress, Tim Walz likes to use that. And he likes to highlight his military service. With 27 years in the military, I'm a battalion command sergeant major, and I've got 4 combat deployments. I think that will negate a perceived positive for him. Secondly, I'm a private sector guy. I'm in the business world. I work in a company that if I don't make sales, the company doesn't turn a profit. You take that profit and turn it right back around into research and development and new products. That's how the private sector works. And I think that, again, we need to return that thought process back to government. Because right now, government thinks that the country works for it instead of the other way around. And I think that the longer we have that mentality continuing, the worse off we're going to be as a country.
Thank you, Aaron. Mike's up next.
Thank you. I'm the only candidate of the 3 that's actually won a general election. In 2010, I took on an incumbent, much like Tim Walz, someone who couched himself, in fact, as a middle-of-the-road Democrat and had the same kind of record. Tim Walz votes with his party 91% of the time, and so did Andy Welty. So I have legislative experience. I've actually been in the well and had to take votes and stood tall when it needed to be, when it counted. I made conservative votes. I'm already someone that you can trust that when you go to Washington, you don't have to worry about where Mike Benson stands. I'll stand tall on the same principles that you espouse. And I'm the only one that has real legislative experience, actually working in committee and then having bills written and work through the process, taking them to a conference committee and have them passed and written into law. So that will give me a big leg up in terms of being able to get there right off the bat when I get to Washington, D.C. I can tell you that when you first are elected, it's like drinking water through a fire hose. You get a lot of information, it takes a while to get acclimated to what actually goes on. I won't have that learning curve. I'll be able to go out there and be an asset immediately to the caucus. And from the standpoint of someone who has experience, thank you. I have executive experience and led an organization of 6,000 employees. So I think I can handle the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, the next question we're going to go with Aaron, then Mike, then Jim. And the question is, what do you consider to be the 3 top federal issues? Aaron, Mike, and Jim.
That's easy, because we've been talking about them since we announced our campaign on August 6th. It's number 1A, 1B, 1C, however you want to put it. It's the debt, the deficit, the economy, and Obamacare, and they're all 3 rolled in there together. You know, even though we have a budget that was passed, the President hasn't signed it yet, I don't think it does anything to reduce our debt. I don't think it does anything to reduce our deficit. I think that we should have held out for a much better deal. Secondly, when you really look at our long-term outlook, we can't go 5 years or 6 years without having a budget as a country. I know my household wouldn't run 5 days without a budget. Most of you understand that. Our business wouldn't run without a budget, but yet we've done that as a country for 5 years, and look where it's got us. Okay, $17 trillion in debt. And with Obamacare, I look at the fact that we're supposed to have 7 million people signed up by March in order for this to be even potentially viable. Well, the Republicans have been telling the Barack Obama administration, Tim Walz, that it's not viable for 3 years. And all that's going to do is add to the debt, the deficit, and it's going to saddle my children and my children's children with more and more debt.
Thank you, Aaron. Mike?
I think we're going to be pretty clear on this. I think most of us are going to run on Obamacare to begin with. All you got to do is talk to your neighbors about the problems that it's caused, the premiums that are going up, people who are losing their policies. So first it's going to be about Obamacare and making sure that we can return to the free market principles that made the American healthcare system the envy of the world. And it's been said already, and you know, hopefully we'll get into a question that we'll begin talking about the bill that was just passed. But 40 cents on every dollar is borrowed in the American budget right now, in the federal budget. 40 cents on every dollar. If you're in business, you understand that cash flow, it doesn't take very long, and you can't afford it. Just the service of that debt will equal $1 trillion within 5 years. We have a $17 trillion deficit and moving up. So it's got to be about budget and the deficit. And it's been said, and it's going to be said again, I'm sure, with the person behind us, we can't go without a budget. And one of the things that I will work towards, and eventually I pray that we'll be able to do at a state convention of all the states, is that we have to get to a balanced budget amendment. That's the only way that we can force the hand of the federal government to make sure they don't keep spending more than we bring in.
Thank you, Mike. Jim.
I'm running against big government. I mean, what's going on in Washington, D.C. is crushing this country. It's crushing the economy. It's making people fear their government. It's making people feel like, you know, the government owns them. And Tim Walz is on the wrong side of all these